We're officially getting started. Can everybody hear me okay? Tell me if I'm too loud or not loud enough. I've been talking all day, so my voice might fade. So as we were saying, my name's Ryan.
I'm also Ryan.
This is Ryan. There will not be a quiz at the end of this. But if there was, it'd be pretty easy to pass based on that question. And we're here to talk to you about sort of a beautiful, but maybe also big, hairy idea that we love. We're already getting started, Ben. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Awesome. But a big, beautiful, but sort of hairy idea. It's both big picture and strategic and kind of small picture, whatever that means, and tactical. And the idea basically is digital transformation or maturity. I use those terms interchangeably a lot. And how to break through, how to kind of move your organization along, and how to use digital metrics and analytics, and really specifically Google Analytics as a kind of Trojan horse to help you and your organization do that. So let's get started. I'm going to do the first batch of slides. This Ryan is going to do the other batch of slides. I'm going to be talking sort of the big picture stuff. Ryan's going to do a deep dive into the more tactical stuff. Please feel free to raise hands and ask us questions as anything comes up. This is more or less our agenda for the day. We're going to talk about the digital transformation puzzle and why it needs a champion. Actually, I move that a little bit. So culture, people, processes, and why it needs a champion, who that champion can be, and like the kind of role and importance of a champion. So I think you might be wondering, I'm not sure if anybody is curious about this, like kind of KPIs and digital transformation, kind of how the two fit together or work. So if you are wondering one of these questions or something along these lines, very, very normal. Who here feels like their organization does a good job of digital maturity, or they're a digital first organization, or they really get it? Sort of?
My last organization was, I'm going back to the dark ages.
Yeah, so you have a sense of perspective then? Yeah, okay. Anyone else? And it's fine if everybody's like, I really have no idea even what that means, because I'm about to talk about how there's not that much clarity on what digital even really means. But anyone else? You feel like your organization has like a good handle on digital as kind of a strategy? Not really? Don't want to comment?
Yeah, we're making leaps, but direct marketing still rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, I get that. That's a very, very common scenario. So I think it's helpful to start by kind of framing the problem. Digital is sort of everything, right? I mean, I've been in this industry straight, unflinchingly for 13 years. And I remember when digital really was kind of essentially kind of like infrastructure and a website. And then we built in email, and now we're building in social, and we're building in mobile, and we're building in things like, donor journeys and that take place both kind of online and offline, or in social and in email, and social and in the website. There's a lot of like kind of overlapping, and sometimes a lot of people and humans and different departments and different ownership. So my experience is overwhelmingly that digital tends to serve many different masters. They tend not to work together super well. And usually each department or kind of master has their own business objectives and goals, and therefore digital means different things to different people. Usually if I go into an organization and ask the person who's in charge of data and IT what digital means to them, it tends to be a very different answer than what the comms person or comms director is going to say. And this really kind of sort of gets to the crux of the problem. It's like this not understanding each other, not working together. And the main idea, I've been sort of a broken record about this for probably about 2 years now, and it's not like this is just my idea, but the main idea for me that kind of sits on top of all of this is that digital used to be kind of commonly thought of as a bunch of different tactics, often working in isolation. Maybe that was okay 10 years ago, right? Maybe email didn't really need to interact and collaborate super closely with something else. But it doesn't work anymore. It's just not optimal at all at this point. So really, the kind of understanding that we need to come to now is that digital is a strategy that serves the whole purpose of the organization. Is everyone with me so far? Cool. Okay, thank you. So a report says there's a problem. You can find this in all sorts of reports, but I had a hand in writing this one, so it was easily on my computer, and I knew where to reference it. The 2017 Digital Outlook report found that 62% of nonprofits and charities surveyed have no digital program. This is like one of those questions that gets right to the sort of the root of the problem. If your organization doesn't have a digital program, it likely means you don't have dedicated digital staff, right? So there might be a comms person who also does digital. Fundraising also does some digital, but dedicated digital staff means ownership. That means you're not following any kind of written digital strategy or likely measuring key performance indicators, or even if you are, there probably is a lack of cohesion, right? Like how do the KPIs or key performance indicators connect back up into the digital strategy, and who owns that digital strategy? Is anybody familiar with this within their organization? Okay, am I speaking the truth so far? All right, tell me, yell out lies if it sounds like I'm not speaking the truth, and we'll see how I react to that. Hopefully I won't blush and run away in shame. Like I said, I have been doing this for 13 years, so it's all experientially based. This is, I think, what we're trying to move towards. I have, when it's other people's ideas, references at the bottom. This is sort of, I think, a pretty good definition, maybe a little bit wordy, but so am I. Digital capabilities in which an organization's activities, people, and culture and structure are in sync and aligned towards a set of organizational goals. The idea is like this beautiful kind of holistic 360-degree perspective where things are actually working together. Nice, right? At least like in theory. But to get there is actually always messy. I've never seen an example of an organization where like the actual, even if you think the goal is straightforward, the journey is not straightforward. And speaking of journeys, digital transformation, I very much see it as a journey. And the other point that we're going to talk about, and Ryan's really going to show very kind of specifically and tangibly, is that it can't be done in isolation. And this is kind of one of the key points to this session here right now, is that when we talk about digital transformation, digital maturity, what we're talking about is kind of either silo busting or working more collaboratively. You can't be working in isolation anymore. It's just not the way. It's not the way our kind of consumers, our donors, our constituents expect us to behave and to interact with them, and it's not the way as organizations we should be functioning. So I think that for me, this question has been coming up for the last number of years more and more, and now some of our clients and just people working in the sector are better able to ask this question, like, I need a good digital strategy, or what does it look like? Or Ryan, what do other good, kind of high-performing organizations and clients, what does their digital strategy look like? It's really hard to answer this question unless you have a sense of where you are on this journey and also where you want to go. This is just a picture that I made. I'm very bad at pictures. My pictures have a lot of words, but in my brain, there's like this continuum of like starting over here and moving over there of digital maturity, and so that's that. You can see basically this idea. So sorry, those words are totally screwed up. It's because I use Google Slides and then PowerPoint and boo PowerPoint. But anyway, what this is supposed to say is this one is adding digital. So at this left end, we have basically kind of what I informally refer to as 1.0 organizations, or sometimes they're called like more like legacy style organizations. Often, not exclusively, but often larger or older organizations kind of fit this description. They work independently, really kind of siloed KPIs, not much sharing, not that much risk, a lot of status quo. This is usually the sort of like, if you're going to use only two words, which is hard for me, I would call this adding digital, like slowly piecemeal. And then usually the way that the kind of trajectory works is you're trying to, if you are consciously, thoughtfully trying to be more digitally mature and more embrace kind of digital transformation, you're trying to move from the left to the right, and only in this continuum do I ever talk about moving from the left to the right. So the second one is on the radar. Digital strategy, so you have a program and you're sort of like experimenting. And then moving further to the right, there's some leadership buy-in, and there's investing in training, there's understanding talent, or essentially kind of your human resources, how to hire, right? So this is where you're, it's not just in the job description, but also once people are hired, how do you can't just say, we want to hire a certain kind of person with a certain sort of skill set and a bunch of characteristics. You actually have to kind of live that and work that once that person is hired. There's more overlapping or shared KPIs, there's testing, there's embracing, there's being kind of test-friendly and failure-friendly. The stuff about culture starts to make sense, because frankly, when you talk about culture over here, there's a lot of like, how does that even, and like trailing off of the sentences. But over here, with leadership buy-in, it's starting to make sense. And then usually at the furthest right is digital first organizations. Does anybody have in their mind, you can share with me or not, share with us, or not share with us, an organization that you're on their email list maybe, or you get their texts maybe, and you're like, they're pretty digital first. They seem to kind of have it going on. Like what we see in mobile is what I see on the website. It's what I see in, like, the ads all make sense, and like they seem like they kind of, have it figured out. Anybody have an example of that kind of organization?
The SPCA has a pretty great digital program.
Cool. Anyone else?
Charity Water.
Yeah, totally. What's that? Okay, cool. Does this all make sense to everyone? I am so curious about this. I don't want us to be shy. Do you feel, I will not ask for the name of your organization, and I promise not to read your thing later, but does anyone want to tell me, or just stick up their hand with the number of like where they think their organization is? Actually, it's hard to stick up your hand or fingers with a number, because most people that I've done this with like to choose half numbers. But anyone want to share where they think their organization is? Nice. Okay, 3. That's a 3. I don't have those numbers here for no reason at all, but 3. Yeah? Anyone else? Okay, cool. Good for you folks. That's pretty cool. So a lot of this digital maturity stuff comes down to not technology really at all, right? Like it's sort of like this interesting irony, but generally the people who work and have worked in technology see this a lot, that the technology is really kind of teachable, and that's like a relatively easy skill to learn and adapt. The harder stuff are these essentially a bunch of characteristics and ideas that really have a lot more to do with culture, people, and processes. So when we talked when I mentioned at the start of this that a lot of this has to do with kind of silo busting or working more collaboratively, those are some of the examples of that. Less hierarchy is another example. More agility is another example of this. So digital maturity is what happens really kind of at the intersection of these things. It's basically where change management meets digital. And these are some of the characteristics, and I think some of the ones that I just bolded some of the ones that I think are most relevant to our conversation today. Data-driven, holistic, agile, and cross-functional. Any questions about any of this so far? All right, awesome. These are some of the questions that I think, these are sort of, I'm happy to share these and all the stuff that I read about in my spare time that kind of informs this stuff. I'm happy to share this later. We don't need to go through these questions now, but there are a number of questions inevitably that you need to start asking. There needs to be some kind of thoughtfulness. Questions need to go on paper. They need to kind of inform some sort of strategy, whether it's campaign-based, organization-based. Like who's making decisions? What are the structures that digital fits into? I've got another slide of questions too. How will you work? Right? Is it more top-down? Is it more iterative? What kind of training will happen? This is like one of these things that seems like a small thing, but it's actually a really huge thing. If you're an organization that's not at number 4, but you're trying to move somewhere towards that, it's actually critical to be sharing, to be communicating openly and ideally transparently and sharing the stuff that you're learning, right? So this is the campaign my team is working on. You might not, you and Major Gifts might have nothing to do with this, but I want to share this with you anyway, in the spirit of collaboration. If you have questions or ideas, we're in this together. And then sharing results afterwards. This is how essentially kind of digitally mature organizations, especially if you're older or larger, can move along that continuum. It's a lot of it really does come down to this idea of collaboration, silo busting, and transparency. And a lot of this comes down to, or like one of the main ideas here is really kind of who's in charge of this. If you don't have a digital director, if you don't have an ED that's really all over this, you sometimes organizations will kind of look around and be like, I don't know, maybe it's got to be me, basically. Enter the digital champion. The idea, this is not a complex idea. It's just basically that we are in this interesting state in 2018, coming up close to 2019, where we know digital is a thing, we know it's not tactics, it is a strategy, or we're trying to move it more towards strategy. How do we get there? Generally speaking, the only way it can happen is if somebody internally owns it, right? Regardless of kind of your job title, ideally you have some decision-making power, but somebody needs to own it at some point. The problem is that this isn't the way organizations work. So there's kind of this innate conflict here, but it is what it is, right? Organizations have a specific kind of structure, and I'm not deeply learned in change management, but I see how this plays out in the real world every day. So we need to sort of like not fight back, but like work through this kind of, I don't know, existential conflict maybe. Like it's not the way organizations work, but we still have to kind of understand that digital is moving from something you do to something you are, right? And once you can start asking these questions, this is where kind of rubber meets the road. Once you, maybe you folks here or somebody else within your organization can be that champion, that's when you can start to say, okay, how can we start using digital analytics, basically, metrics and analytics to start kind of helping us within our organization move and become more essentially digitally mature. And there's a lot of kind of iterations, a lot of answers to this question, or kind of versions of the answer. But again, it comes down to, and I'm starting to sound a bit like a broken record, but it comes down to communication, transparency, collaboration, and knowing what questions to ask. And you will not know what questions to ask until you start actually collaborating more. So just obviously not a real pop quiz, but if you want digital maturity, what do? Go meditate about how everything's connected, start a winery in Italy to reflect on terroir grapes and how Italians just get it. Or C, better understand that this is a strategic endeavor. Nobody needs to actually answer that question. So basically, in conclusion, once you're starting to see digital more strategically, you can see how all these things start to come together. And, hashtag metrics for the win. None of this happens without somebody internally who can embrace some of these characteristics and start to drive the kind of data-driven and metrics-based conversation forward. And on that note, I'm going to hand things over to the other Ryan.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. That was really good. So Ryan gave this really great overview in terms of some of the work that we do with our clients in order to gain internal buy-in for projects that really need kind of internal digital transformation in order to happen. And the next part of this is really, I want to dig deep into like the kind of tactical way that this happens. We named this session the way we did because it's really about those people getting together and having conversations about the work and about the initiatives that their organizations are undertaking when it comes to digital transformation. And the best way that we see that happening is when we can all agree on the data that we're looking at, the data that we are using to inform those decisions. And so I want to go through a little bit around how our process is around creating measurement plans and measurement strategies. Who here has ever crafted a measurement plan or measurement strategy for a project or for their organization? Great. So I hope we can have a conversation afterwards about your approaches. I'm going to cover an approach that we take, and then show you actually how we apply some of this learning to engaging networks. So we're going to get into the platform. We're going to start measuring some of the key conversions that we all use in Page Builder, and start measuring things better. So for us, a measurement plan is really about taking a look at performance. We do this in the context of both individual projects, but also organizations that really need to think about what a long-term digital strategy looks like. And usually this comes up around bigger initiatives. Maybe it's a CRM migration or a website development, where there are a number of stakeholders across the organization who have an interest in the outcome for that project. One of the reasons that we start with measurement in our conversations is because a lot of what we hear from, from our clients and other organizations are things that are based on perception. The idea is that things aren't working well, or the feeling that our website is broken, or the feeling that something isn't performing as well as it could. And really, those perceptions, although they may be true, aren't really grounded in any firm data. And so what we need to do is we need to do some analysis first to understand actually where we are, so that we can start thinking about where we want to go. So for me, a measurement plan really has like 4 key components. We have our objectives. That's what we're trying to achieve in our measurement. And objectives can be both very discrete or broad for an organization. And when we're talking about organizational objectives or cross-functional objectives, we're looking at kind of mission and values-driven objectives. So an organization's ability to execute their programs, execute their mission through their digital properties. Channels, that refers to where digital happens. Every organization has a different number of channels that they've activated, whether it's their email marketing list, their social media list, maybe their mobile community, through their websites, or through multiple websites and programs that might be executed. But really understanding like where does digital happen for an organization, and kind of inventorying all of those channels together, and understanding who the different stakeholders are who own those. And key conversions, really, this is like where measurement happens. What are we actually measuring? What does success look like? What are we asking people to do? What can I actually start to measure and build that will help me understand, are we reaching our objectives? Underneath each conversion are metrics. There's one of the biggest challenges I find with getting a measurement plan or a strategy enacted is the fact that there's just so much data to pay attention to. And one of the things that we have to start really doing is isolating only the things that we need to pay attention to in order to make these decisions and move forward. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, what that looks like. So as I was saying, objectives can be broad or they can be specific based on the project that you're looking at. And the goal for us in any digital transformation project is to make sure we're aligning these objectives cross-functionally. And that usually starts with having conversations. So talking to a variety of stakeholders, understanding how they relate to digital. What are their requirements for digital? What are their objectives in their role? And looking at broadly how we can combine those into kind of meaningful terms that we can start to measure. And so we hear different types of objectives. Revenue is a big one. Engagement is a big one. Sometimes these can change year over year depending on where you are as an organization. Maybe 1 year your major objective is growth, and 2 years from now your major objective is going to be retaining that growth. These objectives can change as your organization evolves, and what you look for is you look for alignment in terms of where you get the most investment in those objectives for the period. So these are kind of like very ephemeral, like they're big concepts and big ideas, right? I can't put a number against brand and say we're doing well. I have to start thinking about what does that mean for this organization, and where does brand actually being reflected on digital. One way we start to do that is by looking at channels, as I said, and so starting to inventory all of the channels that your organization is on, looking at the different digital properties, who manages those properties, having conversations with them and understanding what their needs and challenges are, so that you can start to understand how we can align different stakeholders around these broader organizational objectives. Inventorying all the kind of key conversions that happen online. There's some ones that are like kind of seemingly normal here. We look at like monthly gifts, single gifts online, advocacy actions, leads generated, subscriptions generated through our websites. But what about content? I mean, organizations invest a significant amount on content development through our blogs and through our web properties, through social properties. How do we start to measure the performance of content? And what does the conversion look like for a piece of content? Is it how long somebody spent on the page? Is it that they read the full page? How many page views that content had? And then looking at other metrics that are around the performance of your social networks. Are people sharing? Are people subscribing? So these are all the types of things we can measure around our digital properties. And now what we have to look at is like, how do we align our different properties with those broader objectives, and what metrics we can use to start to build a kind of map of what we want to actually measure. And so going in and looking at how does the website contribute to brand engagement, revenue, retention, whatever our broad objectives are. How does our email program relate to those objectives? And you start to see that each channel kind of contributes very differently to performance. And you start to isolate through this process what you really need to pay attention to and what metrics you want to measure. At the end of this process, and this is something that needs to be iterated, it needs to be investigated, because as I said, there are so many different metrics we could pay attention to. Finding the right ones for your organization means a little bit of research. So in this case, when we're speaking of brand, we're looking at, are we targeting new visitors through our search terms? How many brand mentions are we getting through our social properties? What is our total social reach for our organization, and how many visits were a direct result of somebody putting our brand into Google or to Bing to visit our website. So we know that with those indicators, if we can create initiatives that increase those indicators, then we know that our brand is healthy, is becoming more healthy, because people are actively finding or searching for us based on those terms. And these are metrics that we can then assign to a performance of our social campaigns, performance of our web campaigns, our search campaigns, and our content. So finding the right metrics and assigning them to those broader objectives is where we then lead to being able to create kind of the dashboards that support both our programs and our organizations in general. And so where I want to get to is the ability to actually just reduce the amount of noise that we get from platforms like Google Analytics and focus in on only the metrics that matter. So this is a dashboard that we built in Google Dashboard. It's based on data that is configured in Google Analytics, and it's purely focused on the website. This is this is measuring the performance of an organization's blog, and for that organization, this is really around mission fulfillment. So they see a part of their program execution, a part of their program performance is to make sure that they're delivering key content to their community. But they also want to know what content's working, what content isn't, what content is getting the most performance, and also understanding how that's going to affect future investment. So looking at the number of visits that come to the blog, how many of those visits were direct visits versus visits from other parts of the website, how many total website conversions were generated from that blog, were they able to capture people, maintain people's attention when they were reading that material, how many pages per visit, and how much time were people spending on that blog. And then breaking that down into actually individual performance for those blog items. I don't know, does anybody have ever used a view like this to measure blog performance or content performance on their website? It's really useful and actually pretty easy to set up. All of this data, if you installed Google Analytics, is available to you. It's in 100 different tabs and buttons for you to press and to get the individual numbers there. But something like Google Data Studio is so it's so simple to just extract and simplify what you want to pay attention to in that way. So I hope after today you'll start to use Google Data Studio as a way to do that. The other thing we like to do is we like to measure different funnels on our website. This is actually a funnel we built for Amnesty International Canada. They use engaging networks. Essentially, they look at the performance of their advocacy pages as lead generating. They have experience for their post-action pages that offer sharing, that offer the ability to donate. You can increase the donations by converting them from one-time to monthly using an upsell. And so being able to see what the funnel performance looks like by measuring each part of that journey, sending that data to Google Analytics and being able to visualize it easy allows them to see the performance of those campaigns both in aggregate but specifically as well. Some of this data is already, configured in Google Analytics, but some of it we have to be able to extract from engaging networks in order to get these type of insights. So that's kind of what I want to do next with you, is go through a little bit about what this looks like on a technical side. So I'm going to get a little bit tactical. I'm going to get a little bit nerdy. This is what I do. Ryan does the bigger stuff. I do the little stuff. But what I want to do is this is something that I did in Toronto at the last Engaging Networks conference, and I did this because I feel like people set up Google Analytics and then walk away and say, we're tracking everything, but they don't get into it, right? And I get into it. I love going into Google Analytics. I love seeing, the performance of individual emails, campaigns, social, all tied together, and understanding more and more about who is taking action, who is donating, and the dynamics of those so that it can help inform the work that we do. And so I feel like there's a disconnect between having something set up and actually using it. And who's like in Google Analytics at least once a week, if you raise your hands? Okay, great. It's not enough of you. Okay, so my hope is that I can demystify how all of this works. And I've been able to do this before. I can't promise I will today, but to make it clear that this is something that anyone can do once you understand how a little bit of this works. So why does this matter? One, we need to be able to benchmark performance on our campaigns. We need to be able to benchmark performance so that we can identify what optimizations we should be making. We need to monitor and report on the performance of our campaigns. And also we want to tie in performance to our KPIs and measurement strategy. So it's taken a while for me to get comfortable using the platform the way I can now. But essentially what we want to be able to do is get to a point where we can start to measure all of these interactions in a way that's meaningful to our campaigns. The key thing I would say about Google Analytics is it's important to set it up correctly, okay? I know that goes without saying, but there is a lot to be said about making sure that the data going into your Google Analytics account is correct and gives you a good starting point. The old moniker, garbage in, garbage out, is very true here. If you send the wrong data or the wrong structured data to Google Analytics, it's going to be a lot more complicated for you to get out what you need in order to draw those insights. And so there's a couple things that we always like to make sure that we're doing. One, your tracking ID and your tracking code has to be correct. And that's the little bit of code that appears at the top of every page. I will be showing you that and what that looks like, but also linking your domains. So you have a main website, it has its own domain. Your engaging networks pages may have their own subdomain, something like action dot or donate dot, and you may have some other microsites as well. Making sure that you're using cross-domain tracking so that a user who is going through a journey on your website, potentially starting from social, landing on your website, clicking a donate button, going to a donate page, completing your donation, all of that is tracked as a single session. So that's what Google Analytics calls a session. It's that point where they first hit your website and that tracking ID gets initiated, and then they can start measuring everything you do throughout that site. So making sure that the linking domains is correct is a key thing for being able to track all of your properties from a user's perspective. And then enabling e-commerce. Who knows if who's enabled e-commerce on their Google Analytics? Okay, 2 people. 3 people. Okay, so 4 people. Great. This is like the biggest thing as far as I'm concerned. If you do any fundraising on Engaging Networks, enabling e-commerce is so crucial to being able to understand the value of all of your marketing efforts. From the website's performance to social media, it gives you a dimension around revenue for every action that somebody takes on one of your properties. If someone visits your site, you will know that that visit is potentially worth 75 cents of all the money that you donated, because 10,000 visits equals $20,000, and therefore maybe you should be working on driving more traffic to your site so that you get more revenue on the other side. But it really does change everything, and I'll show you what that looks like for everybody who hasn't attached e-commerce to it. And then setting up goals and events, and we're going to talk more about that today in the context of Engaging Networks, using both advocacy and donation events. And I think I have time. Okay, good. And that again is the other side of this, where we talked about those conversions, those key conversions that we want to track. Well, how we do that in Google Analytics is we set up both e-commerce conversions for donations or revenue, and we set up goals and events for things that are more related to a user's behavior on our site. So an event is like someone downloading a PDF. A goal is somebody maybe signing a lead generation form after visiting other pages. Okay, talks about tracking IDs. The final thing, super important. Are people tracking their links currently? Okay, so this is, again, more dimensional data. It's tying UTM parameters with your links, and this is a feature that's also built into Engaging Networks through your email. So you can add Engaging Networks as a source and a medium to your campaigns, so that you can see who's visiting your site from social. Maybe they're coming from ads or organic, but then if you tie that with e-commerce, then you actually know how much revenue is generated per channel, per source. And that could be really important in terms of future investment. Some things people get a little bit confused about is like, what is a source versus a medium? And so I just put together this handy chart. Everyone will get a copy of this presentation afterwards. Essentially, a source is a external platform. It is any website or property that is external to your property. And there are some built-in sources in Google Analytics that Google Analytics knows and can measure. Those are Facebook, Instagram, Google, Bing, Yahoo, AOL, and Twitter. But then a medium is kind of within those platforms, within those sources. It's the kind of information that a person saw or engaged with before they came to you. Because a person can engage with an organic social post, a paid post, or a share, and that can be cost per click, cost per mile, CPM, I hate that term, or others. And these are all determined by how you've set up your search or ad platforms. But you want to be able to distinguish how your organic is performing versus your paid. And so that's why setting these up correctly and being consistent is the most important property here. So one of the major pitfalls I see when people set up Google Analytics is they aren't consistent in their mapping. So having something that is a document or a spreadsheet that your organization uses to make sure that the naming conventions are accurate are really going to help you with the data you extract from that. E-commerce tracking, again, I'm going to show this to you, so not quite important yet. But page JSON. So I'm Engaging Networks developer. recently accredited. Very happy about that. And one of the newest features in Engaging Networks as a developer that I'm really fascinated by is this page JSON. So every time you load an Engaging Networks page, in the background there's some code. This code gets output to every page. Users don't see it, but as a developer, I can access it. And so for the first time, I have all of this kind of exposed information about what's happening on the page. And so using this information, I can start to build analytics events to mark what's happened. So on page 1 of a campaign, I know that the page is loading and I can add a page view. On page 2, I know if somebody took action, I know they have a supporter ID, I know maybe a little bit about their country of origin, and I can send a conversion that says a lead was generated. I can do the same thing for donations, only now I get a little bit more information. I know that a gift was processed. I know how much that gift was for. I have the campaign ID, the receipt ID. I know if it was a recurring donation. So now I can also measure one-time gifts versus monthly gifts on the same campaign page. And what we use that information for in Google Analytics is to track events and goals. So I mentioned these before. These are really important and crucial parts of Google Analytics. So events are any measurable interaction that occurs on your properties, from a mouse click to a download to somebody completing a form, filling out a certain form field, maybe selecting a certain element for your form. You can generate these events. And these events might be important to you. Maybe you really want to know, like in that blog, what people were engaging with. So I can send an event that says somebody viewed a blog, here's the name of the page, and store that as an event. And goals are a little bit different. Goals are usually assigned to a KPI, and they usually have a monetary value. And they also, along with a goal, has a conversion data. So there's a conversion rate associated with it. And usually you can configure goals by things like page destinations. So one of the common things to say, like, you see the last page of a donation campaign, and that's a goal, and therefore we register how much revenue was generated from that goal. But what I get in Google Analytics is I get everything that happened along the way. I know where you started your journey, what pages you engaged with, what form fields you filled out, all of this kind of extra information that lets me determine the funnel or the conversion funnel that you went through. So I want to show a little bit of this and go through this a little bit on the technical side, and I'm going to look at Google Analytics and Tag Manager to do that. So I've set up a container in Google Tag Manager. Who here is familiar with Google Tag Manager? Raise your hand. Okay, great. So who here manages their own Tag Manager? Very common. Okay, so mostly this is an agency thing is what I've noticed. If you work with a media buyer or a marketing agency, they're probably asking you to install a Google Tag Manager now. And then they're going in here and kind of setting everything up for you. If that's the case for you and your organization, I highly recommend that you talk to that agency and have them spend an hour with you, walking you through everything that's configured in Tag Manager. You'll find it useful to understand how all of this works together, but you'll also be able to understand kind of like what opportunities exist for you to improve this. So in the old days, before Google Tag Manager, life was grim. What it looked like is you had to install a little bit of code on every page that you published, on every website that you published, and every time you added a Facebook pixel or a new marketing pixel, you'd have to go and edit those pages again. And inevitably, you would forget about half of the pages you needed to update, or the software companies would make an update that would force you to redo everything you just did the week before, and it was a pain in the ass. Google Tag Manager, what it does is it alleviates the need for you to do that by just giving you one piece of code that you ensure is at the top of every page, and then anytime you need to make updates, you do it from this interface. So let's say I hire a new agency tomorrow, and they're going to come in and they're going to build all of these new marketing pixels for a ad platform I've never used before. I give them access to Google Tag Manager. They add their code, and now all of the pages that our company owns or manages gets updated automatically. And so I spend a lot of time in here trying to configure things for our clients, make things a little bit cleaner and easier to do. But also with Page Builder, there's tremendous opportunity to improve how we track on engaging networks. Remember before I showed you that page JSON, that list of like little bits of outputs that happen on pages? Well, what we can do now through Google Tag Manager is actually we can like expose all of that information and put them into variables. And what's interesting about that is now Google Tag Manager knows what Engaging Networks page I'm on. It knows if I'm on page 1 or page 2. It knows if a donation happened. It knows how much the donation was worth. And so based upon all this new information, I can start making decisions and saying, okay, well, if you know how much money we raised because we just had a donation happen, can you also send that information to Google Analytics for me? And so that's kind of the opportunity that exists now with this new model, is to start to take this information from these pages, from the code, and use them as signals for our measurement plans and strategies. So the two most popular things that I want to be able to track in Engaging Networks are when somebody fills out a form that's a subscription form or an advocacy action, and when someone makes a donation. So if I can track those two things, then I know how many leads I'm generating and how much revenue I'm generating. And I can start to relate those two things together. And so here in Google Tag Manager, I'm going to show you what those look like. The first things first, though, installing Google Analytics. Google Tag Manager has a very simple process in order to do that. What it looks like is adding what's called a tag. There are two things in Google Tag Manager. There are tags and triggers. The tags are what you want to do. The triggers are when you want to do that, okay? So with Google Analytics, what I want to do is I want to track every time someone opens up a page. And so I can come here, add Google Analytics as a tag. Tell it to load Google Analytics. I already have some settings made here. And then triggering, I just want to do this on all pages. So now when I hit save, Google Analytics is going to load on every page on all my websites that Google Tag Manager is installed. What I also want to do is I want to measure an advocacy action. So here in Google Analytics, I've added a tag for that. And this is another Google Analytics type tag. This, instead of tracking a page view, tracks an event. This type of information goes into Google Analytics as an event. And then I categorize what information I'm sending along with it. So let me just show you what that looks like on the Google Analytics side. And I'll come back to that in a second. So here are all the events that I'm tracking for this client. I have donations and leads. A lead for them is an advocacy action. When I send an event, this is where I see those events generated. I can go in to a specific event like a lead and see that over this time period we've had 3,794 events happen. That is 3,794 people who have filled out a form. I have a little bit of extra information. I have actually what pages from Engaging Networks that they filled out those forms. So now I see all of my Engaging Networks forms and all of the actions associated with them. But also I can send information about countries. So now I know which country those actions happened as well. So one of this organization's KPIs is reach, and that is they're looking for growth outside of North American markets, and a lot of their organization's investment is in building marketing efforts that reach into Europe and South America specifically. And so by sending this information to Google Analytics, I have some indicator about how those are performing. Any questions so far? I want to stop there for a second. I should have stopped like twice for questions by now, but any questions about any of this? Okay, not good. There should be questions. Yes, go ahead.
Basic ones, so I'm embarrassed. But
Nope, please don't be. I'm sorry.
You're saying for the tag manager, there's a different tag for each type of form? Or each type of thing, or is it the same tag for everything?
Yeah, so tags are different. Tags are, remember, they're the what you want to track or what you want to happen. And so there are a lot of different tags. There are tags for things that you want to send to Google Analytics. It's really like where you want the data to go. There are marketing tags for Google Optimize. So if you want to install Google Optimize, but you can also install custom tags. So for instance, one of the most common things to do is install a Facebook pixel. So if Facebook, this tells, I fire this tag anytime someone visits my page, I send a pixel to Facebook, and now I can target those people with ads on Facebook. So that uses that infrastructure there. Tags are the code, essentially, that you want to insert into your pages. And then triggers are when you want to insert that code. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes, go ahead.
So you, on all your pages on all your website, you put one little piece of Google Tag Manager code at the time you can add whatever tags you want?
Yes, and I'll show you what that looks like in Engaging Networks. Oop, wrong one. So here I'm just going to my Manage Pages, and I'm going to one of my templates. I'll just pick my petition template for now. And in the header here, where I can edit the header and the footer for my page, I install the Google Tag Manager code right at the top of the page. Once I have that tag in my templates, as long as it's in all of my templates, then I can add all of these marketing triggers to it. When in Google Tag Manager, I can just get the code right from here, and it has very simple instructions on how to copy and paste that. You can add any tag you want to any page, and not only that, you can insert kind of anything you want. So there's ways to like actually conditionalize content or modify what a person sees by any kind of interaction. So it's something that's very useful in order to like make updates to a lot of different pages at the same time.
Even if the page doesn't have any kind of any trigger on it?
Yep. Yeah, so it loads on every page load. Like if I go to this campaign page and I hit refresh, you'll see at the bottom of the page, it has Google Tag Manager installed, and I can see everything that's kind of happening on this page in the background. Yes?
Is adding too many tags negatively impact load time?
Yes. Yeah, so like any kind of code that you add to your pages, it's potential that that code will slow down your pages. But these are little bits of code, and essentially in some points they're just like one line of code that you're sending. So to send an event, for instance, it's really just only inserting one line of code.
Have like old Facebook pixels on a page and then we install Tag Manager later, will they interact negatively?
Essentially, probably not, I will say. It's okay to have, in Facebook's instance, multiple pixels firing. A lot of organizations do. Facebook kind of handles that itself. It won't fire the pixel multiple times. So it wouldn't be a challenge. Yeah.
So once you install the code in the header on the template, you don't have to reinstall it every time you create that template.
So usually with templates, my recommendation is that you try to only really have a small set of templates, header and footers, that you use and replicate for your campaigns. Because also they're linked to the library in Engaging Networks, it means that if you update one, you're usually going to be updating all of your campaigns at the same time. So unlinking from the library, you kind of like get a little bit messy because you maybe have to manage all of those pages individually, but as long as you keep your templates in the library, it should be fine.
You don't have to paste in a different code for every.
No, it's the same code for each one. Yep, yep. Okay. So I said I was going to try and be successful about demystifying this, and but I think we had too short a time period to do all of that. Here's what I'm going to do, and here's what I wanted to kind of make available for everybody going on today. We're going to be offering this Tag Manager container free to the Engaging Networks community. It's going to have some documentation around the common events that we've set up for donations and leads. If your organization doesn't need one or both of those, that's okay as well. You'll still be able to access the Engaging Networks variables that we talked about. And this could be a good place for you to start in terms of learning about how to configure Google Analytics as a way to start tracking some of these important conversions that are happening on your website. I promised one more thing I would show, and that was the kind of e-commerce data view. Remember I said it was really kind of like crucial to start to add e-commerce data to your site? This is kind of why. So here we see, again, an organization where we're looking at, they run a number of different donation campaigns at the same time. All of their revenue is tracked in Google Analytics. So every time someone makes a donation, we record that information. And sure, I can just see this kind of like information that's like, well, it's the same stuff I get in Engaging Networks, right? How much I raised, what the conversion rates were, and things like that. But what this also allows us to do is tie this data to our marketing efforts. So when I look at the marketing campaigns that we ran in Google Analytics, I also get this extra information which tells me how much revenue was raised through those marketing campaigns. So I see that extra dimensional data that tells me how well social media is doing versus my email program, how well the specific ad that we ran or a specific post that we ran is in terms of contributing to our site's revenue, our donations. I can also start to then segment and see, well, what makes a donor to this campaign different from a donor from this campaign by looking at the audience insights around demographics. Without that data, I'm kind of just like, I have these kind of flat numbers which just tell me revenue, but they don't tell me any meaning behind that revenue. Is most of it coming from mobile or tablet? Is it coming from certain geographic regions? And so you start to draw a lot more insights by adding conversion data like revenue to Google Analytics. So I would say that should be also something that people look at doing coming out of today. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to thank everybody and answer any questions you have for Ryan or I.